For the 4 p.m. news and politics hour, we have Ava Gaudette at 3 o'clock with great lifestyle guests. Tuesday, we usually do a little inside the Beltway checkup, but we're tacking this Tuesday to a little bit closer to home with the Providence Schools around the corner. We have Providence Schools Superintendent Christopher Maher, who we last caught up with at BIF's Summit, and it's good to see him back in here. Come on over.
Good to see you, Kate.
Thanks for coming in. I know it's always a busy schedule for you with the schools.
Absolutely.
But lots going on that we wanted you in studio to talk with folks about. The new Code of Conduct policy, recently approved by the Providence School Board, wanted you in to really talk about this, the impetus, how it went through the process, and how we came to where we are with what was achieved.
Well, it's been a long time coming. It actually had been in the works since before I came here, and I arrived as superintendent 2 years ago. So, but we've gone through a very iterative process, making sure that it aligns with RIDE standards, making sure that it aligns with any state laws, and also making sure that it aligns with our values, most importantly. And as a district, we are moving forward and really trying to look at everything through a lens of equity and continuous improvement. And so some of the substantive changes in the Code of Conduct revolve around that. And we're moving away from punitive and more towards what we call accountability in terms of the way that we're handling student behavior challenges. So, for example, in the past, where for a very small infraction, students would be suspended out of school, now we're trying to actually have them, hold them accountable within the school walls with the restorative justice framework. I mean, the truth of the matter is, we all know when students get suspended, they stay home for a few days, they play video games, they're not necessarily learning from their mistakes, and most importantly, they are missing out on learning, and the relationship between the teacher and the student has been fractured. So if we can find a way to have a meaningful accountability within the school walls for our students, instead of sending them out at home, or worse sometimes for the older kids in the streets, that's what we want to try to do.
So how does that look like if a student gets in trouble, engages in these restorative justice practices? You know, what type of setting are they in? Who oversees them? How are they focused on their academics? And then is sort of the psychology of it addressed about understanding what might have transpired, where they might have transgressed, and how they can perhaps do better moving forward?
So absolutely. So in the district, we are not a cookie cutter district. So we really believe in school-based decision making. The more decisions that can be made close to the child, the more informed the decision. So far be it from me as someone to sit in my office and say, this is the way all 41 schools should handle it. What we're doing is giving schools guidelines, and schools are addressing it in different ways. One of the ways that we've done recently over the last 2 years, a brand new position in the district, was called a student support dean.
Okay.
And you know, this is where charter schools have been doing this for years, and as I like to say, why should charter schools have all the fun? And what we were able to do was create this new position in a number of our schools, and this person is there to de-escalate with the child. They get trained on de-escalation, they get trained on restorative practices. So maybe a lot of our children coming to school every day already wound up very tight with trauma. I mean, we know, unfortunately, that many of our kindergartners that come from extreme poverty come with post-traumatic stress syndrome similar to a veteran of a war. I mean, that is just tragic when you think about what our children are entering school with. And sometimes the slightest little thing can set them off. So instead of saying, okay, go home for 3 days, where maybe that thing is going to get worse, these student support deans are in place to have conversations with kids, find out what's at the root cause of the problem, and try to address that. The other thing that we've done recently is expanded what we have as a mental health services in our schools. We're going to have them in over half of our schools this year for students and for their families, because oftentimes the problems that students bring in terms of their behavior are not isolated to the student. It's part of something that's going on with the family. And so what we've been able to do is offer these services to students and families. So really looking at the social emotional needs of our children as wholes, instead of just, you came in, you did this, so I'm going to look at the letter of the law and throw you out for 3 days. So the last thing that I'll say on this, well, maybe not the last, maybe you'll have more questions, but through a partnership with City Hall and the Mayor's office, we have added 7 new middle school positions called school culture coordinators. These individuals will not only help with student behavior, they're also going to be trying. Part of their job is to bring the community into the schools more, so that students see themselves reflected more in what they're learning and what they're doing every day. And so for us, that is actually one of 3 of the ways that we're trying to address this issue. But there are many more, because what we know with middle schools especially, think about this, you're in an elementary school, you've got 200, 300 students on average, then you go to, you know all your teachers. Then, and this is a problem in all of America, you go to a big 1,000-student middle school, you have to switch classes, the rigor gets bigger and harder, And just to like play a cruel joke on them, you're going through adolescence. So, and we wonder why kids disengage. And what research is showing us more and more is that high school is not where students are disengaging. Middle schools where they're starting to disengage. So what we're trying to do is do a lot more with our middle schools this year.
It's that really pivotal time. And you talk about the mental health services being in half the schools. Is this a budgetary issue? Is your goal to get them in all the schools?
Absolutely. And one of the ways that we've done it with a number of partners, and we're able to do it through the Affordable Health Care Act and other ways that we partner with agencies that are trained in how to do this, and they come in and they do it. But yeah, it's not just about budget. Some of it's about scale. You know, we want to make sure this is going well. You don't just want to say, hey, we're going to do this in all the schools, and then it doesn't work very well. That's not good. What we want to do is make sure we have quality as well. So it's not just about quantity for us.
So talk with us. The school board just, basically rubber stamped this and said, now we're official. Have the restorative practices been utilized and that was a formality, or was that really the green light to move forward and say, okay, now you can, this is the template for which you can move forward?
Well, we work in very close partnership with our school board, and they actually had some significant revisions to it to the end, not in terms of the content, but what I think they really did a good job was, and we brought in external partners, the ACLU, which is more known for telling us we're not doing something right, was at the table advising. The Providence Student Union, Young Voices, Youth in Action. We have really strong student voice in this district, and we were able to bring a lot of these external partners in to look at the language to make sure that it was friendly and understandable. And the other thing that we will be doing is working now that we just got it passed. So, but I would say we're going to have student and parent guides that will come out later this year. But I think this is a case of our policy catching up with a lot of our practice.
Okay.
A lot of the things that I've just talked about have been going on since I got here a couple of years ago, and it's resulted in really significant decreases in out-of-school suspensions. So we have thousands fewer suspensions now than we have had a couple of years ago, and we actually just presented on it at a national conference in terms of Providence is becoming known for doing this well. Because you don't just want to say no, like other districts have said, you're not going to suspend anybody at this grade level. That doesn't really tend to work. You can't have those, I don't like those policies where there's no room for human interpretation. But what we've done is focused with the set of principles, hey, how can you work with the staff that you have? How can we do it in a sustainable way? And what we found was some schools did it really well, and then we shared those best practices with other schools, and they were like, oh, if this works at this school, we'll try it at this school. And so by replicating those best practices, we also created something that wasn't a huge budget investment. It was actually more about, hey, different schools trying different things and figuring out what works and what doesn't, and then sharing those among the district in order to get better outcomes for our students.
So we talk about the in-school suspensions, as you said, for perhaps minor infractions. What about the major ones? There'll still be suspensions if it's a real transgression.
Absolutely. So safety is our number one priority, and that will not waver. That will not change. So unfortunately, sometimes there are significant behavioral issues. You have violent outbursts, you have assaults. We have to handle those very seriously, and we will continue to. At the same time, even if there is an out-of-school suspension for a lengthy period of time, our job as the public school district is to work with that child. That is our mission. So even if a child commits a crime, we need to figure out why is that? What setting can they be in as long as they're out of the criminal justice system? How do we serve that child best? And so we are looking at how we can create different learning environments for children that are at different places. And every child learns differently, just as every adult does. So what we're trying to do is figure out how to address all of those students individually.
And is this a working document, if you will? I know you kind of chuckled when I said rubber stamp because it was a process. I didn't mean to say that it wasn't a lengthy and involved.
I just don't want my school board to hear that because they had a lot of voice.
It was a very involved process, as you said, a lot of give and take. But is this a working document? Will this be revisited at the school board level in the coming year and years?
Well, yeah. So one of the things that's great. So our school board has a policy committee, and it's public, by the way. And many of the members of the public came in and helped give voice to this process. And we examine our policies regularly. Now that is not the way it's always been done historically in Providence, to be honest. Because when I got here, I looked at a lot of these policies, and they have been touched for 15, 20, 30 years. And so a lot of the work that I've done in partnership with the school board has been to revise policies to get us to a point where we're actually reflecting best practices from 2017, not 1977.
Now, as you pointed out, I'm sure there are folks who might have had concerns, but there has to be empirical data at the national level from other school districts that have utilized this that you can point to, the number of kids who are, who recommit sort of the transgressions that they've done before. Again, there must be data that shows that. So if folks had concerns, what were they about this process?
Well, I think that we did a really good job being inclusive, and it did take a long time. So I think we had a lot of voice in this process. I always think there are still people out there who are concerned that you're not dissuading the behavior enough if you don't suspend a student.
Okay.
And part of that's about education. You know, I have parents out there that feel that way as well. And I'm a parent in the district. And so we want to make sure, though, what we know is that just suspending the kid does not work. I mean, that's the data. Like, in some case, it actually makes the situation worse, because now you have a student that missed time, that they got a work packet, but you didn't get the rich engagement that you have with their teacher. And you miss that time, and you come back, and now you've fallen behind, and you're more likely to be someone who acts out in class. One of the ways that we decreased the suspensions was by focusing on disrespect and insubordination, which is a code where we know there was nothing violent that happened. We know it was probably a minor transgression. It's something that needs to be addressed, but what we know also is that by suspending those students, it wasn't changing their behavior. We need to engage them and get to the root cause of why are you being disrespectful? Why are you being insubordinate? And then figure out how we can correct that behavior through supports at the school level, because otherwise it's just a matter of time before the same thing happens again.
So wanted to talk with you again about the Code of Conduct policy, but also wanted to talk with you, Superintendent, about chronic absenteeism and making sure the students are in school. Suspensions aside, you know, the issue of making sure they're there daily. The school district, you know, the Providence Schools is doing a number of things. There's schools that are, you know, exemplary schools for trying to turn this around and sort of incentivizing kids. So where's the root cause of this, and how is the school department addressing this?
Well, chronic absenteeism is a very, very significant and complex problem. Over the last 5 to 6 years, we've been going up, and that's actually a trend that's mirrored nationally. Last year, we were able to move it in the right direction, and we got national recognition from the White House and the My Brother's Keeper initiative, but 2016-17, it ticked back up. There are a lot of reasons for chronic absenteeism. In fact, people might be surprised. One of the highest grade levels for chronic absenteeism is kindergarten. And it's because, and this is what the research shows, a lot of parents don't understand how critical those kindergarten years are, because when we went to school, it felt more like playing around and joking around. Well, now we really need these kids, especially we have students that are arriving in kindergarten in Providence that have a 30 million word gap compared to their peers in the suburbs and other wealthy places. And so we need to make up that gap. Every day matters. And so and then at the high school level and middle school level, you're looking at disengagement. You're looking at students that are, when we think about chronic absenteeism, we think about these kids are all cutting classes. Well, at the elementary level, it's much more complex than that. Sometimes you have a parent that unfortunately has a 5th grader and a kindergartner, and the kindergartner gets sick and the 5th grader stays home to take care of that child because there's no one else there. So there are a lot of reasons that this can happen. And it's very much tied to housing mobility and low income, and it's very disproportionately tied to poverty. What we have done is we have some exemplary practices, but what we are going to need to do, because we have to do better on this, is we have to work with parents, we have to work with community groups, and we have to help them understand that every day matters. And so what you'll be seeing over the course of the next year is a campaign that we will be undergoing in partnership with parents and community groups to help people understand how important it is that every day matters for that student.
So a campaign, we like politics here in the studio, something that you might be able to come and kick off here in the studio to tell folks about this?
Unfortunately, I'm not that slick, kid. Sorry, I'm not a politician.
Well, I'll get Laura, she's behind the scenes here. I'll get her when this is officially kicked off to come in and tell us a little bit more about it.
And when I say that, I don't mean I do mean actually a campaign like branded, but I also mean we are going to have programs within the schools to address this issue on a daily basis.
Well, I know that's one of the many things you're paying attention to here, but I'm glad you came in. We want to talk about code of conduct, want to talk about chronic absenteeism. While you have the floor, anything that you would like viewers to know that you've got on your plate, things to look for coming forward with the remainder of the calendar year, but you're just kind of approaching, getting there to the midway mark of the school year.
Well, absolutely. So one of the things that we need to really, I mentioned middle schools. It will be a priority this year and moving forward. We really need to think about how we re-engage middle school students. And I think that there are a lot of reasons that they're disengaged, and we have to figure out how to work with our communities and our partners to do that. Part of that, and we know this because we've done it in Providence and a couple of places already, is we need to create small learning communities within our school buildings. We know that children remain engaged when they're in a smaller environment. That's national, that goes back decades. So how do we figure out how to do that? And that ties into the other thing that I'm really excited about. For the first time in many years, we have a mayor and a city council who have dedicated up to $400 million in new school facilities. Anybody that's been in our buildings knows that we need that. And there have been multiple opportunities for community engagement. We've had hundreds of people come to these these community meetings because we don't want to be the typical school district that makes a plan, and then goes out on a Tuesday night in January and says, "Hey, community, what do you think about it? Thanks, let's check the box."
Oh, no, you've been asking people.
Yes, and we have
Week after week.
hundreds of people that have been involved already, and there will be multiple opportunities to continue to be involved. So please keep your eye out for those, because we want to make sure that the way our buildings get built and what neighborhoods they get built in reflects the needs of our community in a way that is equitable, because I know that has not always been the case.
Well, I appreciate your coming in today here into the studio. It's, again, so much going on, but wanted, again, you to walk through the code of conduct policy, the absenteeism, but again, focusing on the schools. We'll have you back sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you so much,
Superintendent Maher, I'll let you go around the
Bye-bye.
corner. Okay, thanks. Providence Schools Superintendent Christopher Maher wanted him here in studio. The Providence School Board recently approved their new code of conduct policy officially. Talked about what they're doing in the schools to address conduct issues, mental health issues, school culture issues, and as he said, of course, the brick and mortar that has been at the forefront of the news in terms of looking to address these school repairs that are so desperately needed. I appreciate Chris Maher coming into the studio today. We're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We're going to tack over to the politics side of things. Aaron Ruggenberg, recently declared today for Lieutenant Governor. He'll be right here.